Hello all, welcome back to my CCSP exam review, and today we're going to cover a domain 5 cloud security operation. It is a revamp of the previous version of CCSP, which is called as an operation. In 2019, CCSP has revised their syllabus. IC Square has revised the CCSP syllabus and they replaced the cloud operation or operation domain with cloud security operation. The cloud security operation is basically introduce standards and some SOC framework which basically enhance this particular domain. We have to understand cloud security operations or operations security in the cloud is always driven by the business requirement, legal and regulatory adherence, which was missing in the previous version of CCSP. And IC Square has did the great commendable work by adding those particular sections in this particular domain. There are a number of tools, disciplines, and other protocols which is basically used to comprise the cloud security operation which is covered in this domain, which make this domain more impressive and more strong. I recommend all my aspirants who preparing for the CCSP give attention after domain 1 in domain 5 because that can be a turning point for your exam preparation. In a cloud security operation, there are common grounds between the consumer and the provider that must be anchored in a clear contractual and service level agreement languages. So SLA and contract drive the third-party governance between the two parties, and that we're going to discuss in this particular domain. So first part is basically called as a implement and build physical and logical infrastructure for a cloud environment. We need to understand the objective of this particular module. I'm going to discuss each and every domain in a module-wise basis. And we're talking about the first module, which is talk about the build operations, build physical and logical infrastructure. So in this particular section, the first part is basically called as a hardware specific security configuration. Hardware specific security configuration. See, data center should have a hardware and virtualization protection at the component level. So we have two important things which is basically called as a VPC. Give me a second. So we have one concept which is called VPC. VPC basically stands for virtual private cloud. So VPC protection is a fundamental protection at the component level. Okay, fundamental protection in a public cloud consumption as well as a key attribute of a security group. Okay, so you need to have a good understanding of the usage of the security group and VPC from exam point of view. So VPC and security group both are basically introduced as an isolation element. And ultimate goal is to maintain the confidentiality and maintain the security of the multi-tenant environment. So understanding of a security group and VPC is quite testable in the exam. Okay. Another important thing which is required for you to understand is a hardware based tool which is called as a trusted platform module, TPM. So TPM module is also an important feature which is basically required a physical protection of a logical and physical data security center. How basically hardware security module address the security and why it is considered as an effective security in the cloud operation, that is required us to understand from the exam point of view. Another important thing which is important is basically all about the best practice recommendation to secure the host server within the cloud environment. When we're talking about the OS part, we have two things in cloud. One is basically called as a guest OS. And one is basically called as a host OS. Let's take an example of the OS that you installed, the OS which you installed directly on the server, which is a host. And on top of it, you basically install the guests, which is accessible to the user. So we need to take care of the security, not only the guest level, but also we need to consider the security of the host level. This domain, when you're talking about the cloud security operation, you are working for the cloud provider or you're working for the organization who basically build the cloud services. So this domain is basically more from the point of view you're working as a consultant for the company who basically host their own cloud services. And what can be the security we can have from that point of view, that is covered in this domain. So in this section we're going to talk about the host security. Okay, I'm not talking about the guest security because that is a customer responsibility. I'm talking about the host security. Okay, how to secure the OS, how to secure the host. So we have a secure change authority. It means any kind of a changes need to be introduced in the host level. It need to go through a proper change management process. Ultimate goal of a change management is to track the accountability. Second is you need to have a good understanding of the secure build, which is I have addressed in this particular section. Okay, you need to have a good understanding of how to secure build the system, how it works. Then we have a security guidelines which is specific to the biosecurity features. Okay, you need to understand how to drive the secure initial configuration. So summary is very important, is how to secure the host OS server or secure the host servers within a cloud environment. So that requires the secure change authority. We need a secure build. Secure build include the TPM and BIOS level security, because there are several attacks which can compromise the BIOS and by which they can able to compromise the entire host level. And how to secure the initial configuration by protecting via TPM. So this is the kind of controls we can have, a best practices we have by which we can able to secure on the hardware level. Now next thing is basically called as the installation and configuration of the virtualization management tool. This is another module. See, we need to understand something here is secure configuration of the virtualization management tool set is one of the most important step when building the cloud environment. You need some kind of a management plane by which you need to manage the machines. So one thing you need to remember whenever we're talking about the host level security, any kind of a host patching, remember from the exam point of view also always follow vendor management guideline. Vendor management guideline. If you're basically downloading any patch to deploy for the host operating system, follow vendor management guideline. If you want to configure anything on the hardware level, follow the vendor management guideline. If you're planning to download or manage anything related to the firmware and BIOS settings, follow the vendor management guideline. If you go against the vendor management guideline and deploying something else, it can basically corrupt the system, which can impact the availability and integrity of the system. Okay, so installation, when you're talking about the installation and configuration of the virtualization management tool sets, we are talking about this is the second part of implementation of a building and logical infrastructure. Okay. So in this section, the third part we are going to talk about, but before going to discuss about that, auditing is also very important. Auditing and logging of the management tools, because by which we can able to track what kind of a changes has been introduced in the system. So that is also there. What is the role of a cloud customer? What is the role of a cloud provider? What are the kind of a roles we have within the organization who manage the cloud services and all that need to be tracked. The next part is called as a virtual hardware specific security configuration requirement. You need to having a layer of a defenses, okay, which dictates that adequate protection measure that will include using a design measures. So you need to have an understanding of how to enhance the security once you deploy the OS into that. So two major security things that we can introduce to address the host level security is VPC. Okay, and second is called as a security group. Okay, how to add the host, how to add the machines in the security group by which we can able to ensure the confidentiality between the machines. And the second part is basically on overall virtual private cloud, what kind of a security you would like to introduce. The next thing what we have is installation of the guest operating system. Now host is configured. We basically install and configure all level of security. Now on top of it, we are basically installing the guest OS, which is accessible to the user. What is my expectation? My expectation is basically whatever the guest operating system is running, it should provide the effective OS performance, and tool is basically there to manage the entire guest. Okay, so when you basically managing this OS and all that, we need to have a good understanding of the CMP. What is CMP? Cloud management plane. You need to have a good understanding of the cloud management plane. So management plane control is basically used to control the entire infrastructure. Okay, so summary is very simple. First is basically have a hardware. On top of the hardware, we basically install the OS, which is basically called as a host OS, ESXi and all that. And then on top of it, basically install the guest. To provide the security on the guest level, we have a security group and we have a VPC. When you're configuring the host, we will need to have a proper secure change authority. Any kind of a changes you're introducing in the OS host level, make sure we have a secure build. with the TPM protections and all that, and make sure secure initial configuration need to be protected by the TPM and HSM. Whatever the firmwares we have that require the appropriate security. So these are basically the important things we have in the first module of the domain 5. Now the second module is basically called as a operate physical and logical infrastructure for a cloud environment. Now we have implement the infrastructure. We implement the OS on the guest level and the host level. Now what next? We need to manage that. Okay, we need to manage that. So first part is basically called as a configure access control for the local and remote access. Now machine is ready. How to access that? That is a question. Okay, we need to define how to access that. So many of the tools and protocols are basically used to operate in the cloud that were used for the decades outside of the cloud environment. So what we need a granularity. So granularity of a control that is necessary in the cloud calls for the renew optics on how these tools and protocols can be used for it. In some cases, we basically follow the multiple approach, and one of the first is basically called as a configure access control for the local remote access. We have a different kind of a best practices that we can introduce. One is called KVM, very important for the exam. Second is RDP. What is KVM? Secure keyboard video mouse. Third, for the remote management, we use SSH, quite testable in the exam. Okay. But one of the most important thing which is testable in the exam is DNSSEC. What is the ultimate goal? To restrict the dynamic updates. Normally what happens, DNS server receive records from the other DNS server. He has to verify that he receiving updates from the authorized DNS server. So with the help of public key, they verify the resource record before updating that. By which it ensures that okay, the records are coming from the authorized DNS server. So good understanding of a DNSSEC, KVM, RDP and SSH is required in the first section, because these are the controls we can use together to manage the access control for the remote access. I can give you one live example how that KVM can be used. Suppose we have a machine and it is basically configured with KVM system. So we introduce a KVM by which we implement the principle of a least privilege. If I even give the thin client access to the cloud environment, there is a possibility that he can able to download some kind of a data by connecting the external storage and all that. But in this case, what happened is KVM is restrict all kind of things. It is just a machine connect the keyboard, mouse and the keyboard, mouse and monitor. So there's no possibility of information stealing and data thefting. So this is how we can able to remotely manage the machines. That is why KVM is a part of a access control for the local and remote access. By DNS, we can able to reroute the information. If DNS is configured with the fake information, there is a possibility that we can able to redirect the request from one system to other system. So by DNSSEC, we can able to restrict those updates. That is why DNSSEC is basically part of the access control for a local and remote access. The second part is basically called as a secure network configuration. What we need to secure network configuration. So as part of a new CCSP syllabus, they have introduced VXLAN and it is quite testable in the CCSP exam. VXLAN is a part of a new syllabus which is called as a virtual extensible LAN. Okay, which operate on layer 2 and layer 3 of the OSI model. Along with that, we also have a secure network configuration which is called VPN. We also think about TLS because over the network when we're sending a data, 1.3 as per the exam you need to remember. Another important thing, we have a IPsec. In IPsec we're talking about the modes which is called as the transport and tunnel mode. Then tunnel mode is more secure, okay, because it has a 2-layer of encryption. Then protocols are there which is called AH and ESP. Key management they're using a Oakley and ISA-KMP or IKE. So these are basically the protocol suite in use in IPX. In the IPsec. Along with that, we also use different kind of a firewalls, example XML based firewall, which we have discussed in the previous domain. We have discussed about the database firewall, which operate on the layer 7 of the OSI. Okay, so that is basically part of the secure network configuration. The third part is basically called as a OS hardening through the application baseline. Now network is ready. We secure the network. We also define how to access remotely by using a DNSSEC, RDP and SSH. Now what is next? Now OS is basically installed there. We are talking about right now operational. Okay, OS is installed. Now we need to manage the security. What is the best way to manage the security on the uniformity level? By introducing a baseline. Now just imagine you have a 100 window system. Now in the 100 window system, you need minimum antivirus. You need password. Okay, that is a minimum security that need in the system. Now what is a standard antivirus? It should be a heuristic scanner. So that is a standard we introduce. What is a password? 8-character password. So first we create a baseline, and top of it we basically introduce a standard, and then we introduce a procedure. So baseline configuration as per the vendor guideline. Make sure test the baseline configuration before deploying the baseline in the system. Okay, it is very important for you to have a good understanding of SCAP. That is also testable in the exam. Okay, so process very simple. In order to manage the OS, first capture the baseline, define the baseline, test the baseline, and deploy the baseline. It is very important for us to introduce a baseline. Next is basically called as a availability of the standalone host. It is very important to have a group of servers which can basically manage together. So it provides the highly available resources for the workload. That's why we need a standalone host. Sometimes we also need a cluster host. And cluster host is basically clustered host, and availability of the guest operating system is basically driven by two factors here. One is called as a scheduling, and second is basically called as a high availability. Sorry for spelling. Scheduling and high availability is basically required if I want the machine need to be moved in the maintenance mode. Sometimes because of why we need a cluster host, because if we have a multiple host which is basically providing a services, any host I need to move from the recovery point of view or maintenance point of view, make sure it should not have any kind of a downtime on other systems. So for that we need a high availability of a servers. We need a cluster host by which we can able to go for the maintenance mode. If we don't have a high availability with the cluster host and all that, we cannot drive on the maintenance mode. Otherwise it has an overall downtime. So you need to have a good understanding of the uptime and availability. Live example is system is up since morning 9 o'clock. It is a uptime. Availability means the service are available on that. That is matter. So summary is very simple. Guest OS or cluster OS must be there. If it's not there, then it is difficult for us to go for the troubleshootings and all that. Okay. So the summary here is, in this particular module, we're talking about once we have a device, once you have a OS, how to manage it. Okay. So we need an access control. We discuss about access control, how to secure the network in the running operation. What are the best practices we can have to secure things by using IPsec and TLS that we have discussed. Your OS hardening, that is there with the help of strong baseline. Then cluster host is there, cluster servers are there, because tomorrow any server need to go in a maintenance mode. Make sure it should not have any kind of a downtime. We need this. Any user has requesting for access and all that, make sure it should not have any kind of a downtime. So all those things is basically covered in this particular module. Now what is next? Now we basically talking about the overall running systems. So which is basically called as a managed physical and logical infrastructure for a cloud environment. Now things are basically working. What is next? Patch management. Patch management is very important for you to understand from a CCSP exam point of view. We have a two way to deploy the patch. One is called automate, one is manual. Which one is faster and effective? It's automate. It has a faster response. Manual has some kind of errors. It is failed to detect the gaps while deploying the patch, but in the automate we can able to deploy more effectively. One of the important factor which make the automation patch management effective is if we have a consistent baseline across the system. I can give you an example of that. Example, we have a, sorry for the mouse. So we have 4 systems here, system 1, system 2, system 3 and system 4. Like that we have a 400 system which running with the Windows. It is easy with the help of automation we can able to deploy the same patch across the 400 systems. But if they are basically configured with the multi-vendor, then in that case automation will not be effective. So you should know the thin line difference between when to use automation, when to use manual, And another important thing you need to understand from the exam point of view, the drawbacks of using automation and manual. Okay. But the question is why we introduce a patch management. See, normally what happen if I allow my users to use directly vendor updates, now we have a 400 system who downloading an update directly from the vendor site. We don't know what kind of a patch they are downloading. We don't know what kind of patch they are running. Sometimes what happen, patch can also damage the system, corrupt the system. Then we need to roll back. So that is why we basically introduce a centralized patch management process. So these patch management systems basically download the patches. Before deploying the patches, first they try to understand, do we require that patches or not? They do the assessment of the system, do the SIA, involve the change management, incident management system, and by that they schedule the patches. I would recommend you to refer the CBK 4th edition of a CCSP, which has covered the patch management practice in detail. Okay. So patch management is a most important thing for the CCSP exam also. So 2 to 3 questions you can expect from a patch management. Another important thing is to maintain the performance and capacity monitoring. Some examples of the common area to be monitored in the performance, capacity and hardware monitoring is monitoring of the network, monitoring of the compute, monitoring of the storage, monitoring of the response time. Example like network, excessive drop packet. Okay, we need to monitor excessive drop packet. Okay, when you're talking about the storage, which is called disk, we need to check full disk or slow read write to the disk, input and output seconds. How much memory has been used? Do we have any kind of a excessive memory? So that also need to be monitored. We also need to understand about the CPU usage and all that. Okay, so these kind of things we have to monitor on the host level or server level. Another important thing, which I basically here I merged two important topics. One is called as a performance capacity monitoring and one is called as a hardware monitoring. Okay, by end of the day, we do the monitoring to maintain the availability. If we don't do this monitoring, it can directly impact my availability. Another important thing we need to understand is called as a configuration of a host and operating system. We have already discussed, we have a different kind of a network security controls, like we have IDS, which is called as outline mode. Primary role of IDS to detect the intrusions. We have IPS, intrusion prevention mode, which is basically inline mode, which have a capability to prevent the intrusion. Along with that, we also create a trap. Ultimate goal of a honeypot is to basically detect the attacks. We cannot use a word called trap and all that. It is an unethical word used in the organization. Okay, before configuring the honeypot in the cloud environment, we need to consult the legal advisor. Okay. Second thing is basically once you configure the network on a regular basis, do the vulnerability assessment to identify the known attacks. All the isolations can be driven through a network security group. Okay, so we're talking about the network security group. So that is there. Along with that, the important part of this domain is basically called as a management plane. Management plane is basically used to manage the entire cloud environment. So management component are one of the important element of the cloud infrastructure to manage the everything. As you know, one interface is there to manage everything. It comes with the several risks also. So biggest concern if this management plane console is compromised, make sure it should be accessed from the isolated network. Okay, so management plane component are among the highest risk component with respect to the software vulnerabilities, which can impact the tenant isolation also. If that plane is compromised, there is a possibility one tenant can able to access the other tenant data. Another important thing which is introduced in the new syllabus of CCSP, which is called as a cloud orchestration. Cloud orchestration is typically delivered by the cloud management platform that include the several layers of the functionalities. Another important thing which is basically driven by the management plane is called as a maintenance mode. With the help of management plane, we can able to manage the maintenance mode. Maintenance mode. So what is maintenance mode? Maintenance mode is utilized when updating or configuring the different components of the cloud environment, including a virtual machine. Tomorrow, if you want to troubleshoot anything on the virtual machine, any kind of updates need to be done, you need to move the machine in the maintenance mode. Okay. Now here is a trick. What you need to remember from the exam preparation point of view, during a maintenance mode, what we need to enable and what we need to disable, that is a very important part of a CCSP. During a maintenance mode, customers access will be blocked. Remember, okay, customer access will be blocked. Alerts are basically disabled and logs need to be enabled. I repeat again, customer access will be blocked. Alerts need to be disabled and logging need to be enabled. I have seen couple of folks who always get confused in the real exam. They believe alerts need to be enabled and logs need to be disabled. No, alerts need to be disabled and logs need to be enabled. There is a reason for that. Any kind of a troubleshooting you're doing in the system, you want that to be tracked. That is why we say logging need to be enabled during a maintenance mode. Okay, and alerts need to be disabled in the maintenance mode. We basically move to maintenance mode in that condition when we need to do troubleshooting with the machines. Okay. The next part is basically called as a implement operational controls and standard. Very important. See, this module was developed referencing to the two leading industry standard. One is basically called ITSM and second is called as a 20,000 with ITIL. Now we are working on the machines, we managing the machines and all that. Okay, so we are discussing different kind of a service management functions, because once you have a cloud services, once you build the cloud operations and all that, you are dealing with the customer, you're dealing with the day-to-day activity of that machines. So we have a different kind of a we have a different type of a service management function. We have a change management, we have a continuity management, we have a problem management, we have a incident management. You need to know the thin line difference between the all this service management and their ultimate goal. While you're preparing for this section, make sure you should know the thin line difference in their goals and objectives. It is very important for you to understand. For example, we're talking about here incident management and problem management. Okay. So thin line difference between the incident management and problem management is ultimate goal of incident management is to limit the incident, and problem management is basically used to track the root cause. Ultimate goal of a change management is to track the accountability of a change. Ultimate goal of a continuity management is to maintain the availability. It is always used with the availability and capacity management. What is the role of availability management with capacity management in the cloud operation? How the release management is work with the deployment management? What is the role of a configuration management with the change management? So you need to have a good understanding of the service management with this kind of intent, because this is more from the operations point of view. Okay, I'm giving one example here about release management. Release management is a process which make available new and change services and feature for the use. So version of a service or the configuration items may be available for the use. It is closely worked with the patch management for that. Okay. So these are basically the important elements we have. Now, once any kind of an incident has been discovered and all that, okay, we have incident management and problem management. One important advice and one important point that I would like to recommend here is called as availability management. So you must know the uptime and availability are synonymous. System can be up but not available in the case of network outage. We have a capacity management which support the planning for a strategic, operational and tactical level. Okay, service level management we have, if you can see here, which is basically deal with the service level management about the performance to meet the service expectation as related to the business requirement of a service consumer. So these are basically the element which is part of the cloud implementation operation actions. The next part is basically called as a forensic investigation. Forensic investigation is the another important thing that you need to consider from the exam point of view. In the forensic investigation, you should know the thin line difference about the processes, okay, do and don'ts. The biggest concern for the forensic investigation in the cloud environment, that cloud consumer does not have a physical access of the server. Okay, and because of multi-tenant nature, there is a possibility of evidence get altered. It is always a challenge for us to have a complete visibility of a cloud environment during a forensic investigation. And it is always driven by the help of contract and SLA. So there is a one concept we called as a e-discovery. Just give me a second. There is a called as a e-discovery process. E-discovery. You need to have a good understanding of a e-discovery. Okay, you can refer some external documents for the e-discovery, but e-discovery is very important and quite testable in the CSSP exam and CCSP exam also. You need to understand the forensic investigation from the point of view of ISO 27037. Hope you have a visibility of 27037. What is that? It is basically a standard of ISO which offer the guidance on identifying the potential data source and acquiring the data from the sources. Is it clear? It is more like a data acquisition process we have. Okay. So this evidence management, collection of the data, preserve the evidence, these part of the 27037 only. Okay. So that understanding is required from the exam point of view. Next is basically called as a manage communication with the relevant parties. Okay, operation is ready, system is ready, now what? Tomorrow I'm dealing with the services and giving services or giving instances to my customer, providing a cloud services to the customer, or I'm basically dealing with my vendor and all that for any further services and all that. How to communicate? Okay, because security operation is replete with ongoing task that should be done with the respect, with the prospect of the continuous improvement. So establishing the primary requirement of a security operation center is informed by the business mission, regulatory and legal requirement for a service offering. That is why there are multiple tools are there by which we can able to monitor and logging the security operation effectively. And one of the thing is basically by managing the communication with the relevant parties. We need to have an appropriate communication channel and procedure which is required to be set up if organizations intended to be resilient through an impact of all type of services. So each of the communication channels need to have a relevant data for the meaningful response engagements. How to deal with the vendors, how to deal with the customers, how to deal with the partners, stakeholders, all those things need to have a proper channel. And that we're going to understand in this particular thing. So I can give you a small hint here because I don't have a time to discuss more in detail in this series, but if time permit, I will have a dedicated session for that. It is also called as a supply chain risk assessment. Supply chain risk assessment. In my previous series of CCSP course, you can find more information about supply chain risk assessment. Okay. You need to have a good understanding of ISO 18788. I repeat again, 18788 2015. Okay. You need to have a high level understanding of ISO IC 18788 2015. What is that? Management system for the private security operation. I have seen couple of folks who basically preparing for CCSP and they fail to get updates on this particular standard. These are the gold mines while you're preparing for CCSP exam. Okay. Now what is this standard stand for? The standard is basically talk about how to conduct or contracting a security operations. Okay. How to utilize the plan, do, check, act as an implementation approach of conducting and contracting a security operation to demonstrate. So you need to have a good understanding of their SOMS framework, which is covered in the ISO 18788. Okay. SOMS. What is SOMS? SOMS stand for Security Operation Management System Flow Diagram. I repeat again, Security Operations Management System Flow Diagram. Another important thing, so I'm talking about the second part. Okay, the second part is called as a monitoring of a security control. So continuous monitoring is a concept that has grown importance during a transition to the cloud computing. And there is a one framework we called as a ISCM, which is basically called as a Information Security Continuous Monitoring. ISCM, very important for the CCSP people also. What is ISCM? As per the NIST 800-137 define the information security continuous monitoring as a maintaining ongoing awareness of the information security, vulnerabilities and threats to support the organization risk management decisions. Okay, so ISCM, their process are quite testable in CCSP also. Okay, along with that we have a cloud monitoring, log captures. In log capture, we're talking about the SIEM, drivers for the log capture. There is a one standard is basically called as a 892, which is basically a log management recommendation, which basically guide to the computer security log management details to follow the recommendation that should be accomplished more efficient and effective log management for the enterprise. Okay. Another important thing that you need to remember in the CCSP exam is basically called as a SIM function. SIM which is called as a security information and event management. It is a term used to describe the group of technology that aggregate the information about the access control and selected system activities, store for analysis and correlation. So cloud security professionals are responsible for ensuring the proper log management take place. They also need to understand what are the challenges we have integrating the on-prem solution with the cloud solution. Example, like you have a on-prem internal SIM, okay? So we have a internal SIM. Okay. So we have a systems here, which is basically used to integrate with SIM. Now you are using your private cloud services and you want to integrate your SIM with the private cloud. It depending upon what kind of a service model and deployment model you are using. If you're going with the SaaS solution, it is an application provided by the vendor. Doing an integration of SIM with the SaaS solution is a challenge because of the multi-tenant, and it can also impact the other tenant for the provider. So might be it will be a reluctant for the provider to allow your SIM tool to be integrated with them. And that can be addressed by the initial vendor contract in which you can agree with that. So challenges of the integration, okay, is always concern in the SIM. That is another concern. Okay. Another important thing which SIM has introduced, which is called as a next generation SIM, which is made from a data lake technology, Amazon S2, Hadoop and Elasticsearch. I would recommend you when you're preparing for domain 5 or when you're preparing for CCSP in the domain 5, the SOC operation you have to read carefully, especially the standards which I said. If you're new to the governance part, review these documents, which is basically quite less defined in the current book of Cyber Study Guide. This is all from my side. My name is Prab Nair. You can refer my LinkedIn profile again. For more information, you can also message me on LinkedIn and Insta. Thank you so much.